Good afternoon or good morning to all our guests, depending on where you're joining us from. If you're joining us from Montreal, of course, good afternoon. If you're joining us from Israel, good evening. If you're joining us anywhere in between, a good middle of the day. My name is Professor Csaba Nikolenyi. I'm the director of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies, and it is such a pleasure to share the screen and the next hour with a very special person, the producer of the movie that our professors, our students, and members of our constituency were treated to during the past couple of days. Sustainable Nation is the name of the movie, and the name of our guest is Rebecca Shore. Rebecca, welcome to Montreal, to the Montreal screen. Welcome to the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. I want to start by saying that this is a very special event for us because this academic year marks the end of the first decade of our institute at Concordia University, and we are launching into the second decade. We were started in 2011. So your movie and this conversation really opens a whole new chapter, a whole new beginning for us in many ways. We have explored over the past decade so many facets of Israel: history, politics, religion. Many people around the world, of course, and on campuses are interested in these themes and issues. But we have really never discussed and talked about the fascinating innovations that take place in Israeli sustainability and agricultural sciences and projects. Thanks to your work, thanks to your film, we are able to do that. So an even more special welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here tonight and a pleasure. And I wanted to wish everybody a Shana Tova. And I hope you enjoyed watching the film. And I'm very, very happy to be here this evening or morning or whatever time of day.
Whatever it is, wherever you are. Rebecca, what I would like to start with is to introduce you to the audience through your own words. So please tell us a little bit about your own movie-making background. How did you end up being a film producer? What does this medium mean to you? How did it start? Why films? Why not write stories or poetry? Or perhaps you did those two.
We froze up. Hi, are we all online? Because you froze for a minute.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so how was I introduced to filmmaking? I'm actually an artist and a teacher by profession, and I got thrown into the filmmaking business by my husband, so it's really all his fault. Somewhere around 2011, I guess when the Azrieli started in Concordia, I was asked to be a writer on a film called Israel Inside, How a Small Nation Makes a Big Difference. That was Jerusalem U, Open Door Media's first Israel film at the time. And it featured Tal Ben-Shahar, who was the most popular professor at Harvard teaching about positive psychology and his decision to come back to Israel. And so it was shown widely on PBS in the United States. And it really examined the 5, we call them actualizers of Israeli society that really power sort of the special aspects of Israel. They're not unique to Israel, but they're strong. And so I wrote that. And then we turned around and 2 years later, after the success of that film, kind of looked out into the space and realized that there was a really big misconception about Israeli soldiers. So we came with the idea of a film called Beneath the Helmet, where we followed the young Israeli paratroopers from when they left high school to when they went onto the up to the front line. And I was a producer on that. First time I produced anything. So I got really thrown in on the deep end. And then after that, we made a short film about one of the soldiers there called Makonnen, Journey of an African Jew. And I directed that. And that was a shorter film about the Ethiopian soldier in the film. And then after that, we went ahead on to make a film called When the Smoke Clears, which is a film about PTSD and trauma, which I also directed. That won a couple of awards, and that was really interesting, kind of like a trilogy of army films. And then the next film that I made was Sustainable Nation, where I was back to a producer role. So I guess I had a sort of knack for storytelling and the visual pieces of filmmaking. So I think I just sort of got my feet wet and did it. So I was real lucky. why am I passionate about this? I think that there's nothing more powerful than a good story. And I think the combination of visuals and long form documentary are very powerful. Hang on one second, Art. My doggy's trying to get out the door.
Of course.
Did he go outside? Okay, I apologize.
Of course.
And she let herself in the door.
So you were mentioning the importance of storytelling and your
storytelling. Yeah, I think that there's Israel in particular is up against a challenge, because anytime things happen, we kind of respond in an official way, and we respond as a nation. And generally, the people that challenge us are responding in a story way and through personal stories. And so we decided that we really have to sort of meet people and be proactive about telling also the stories and the narratives, and not just being official. And it's not about Israel, it's about Israelis. It's not, it's about the people. It's not about the state, so to speak. It's about the individual. And that's where we really felt that the strength, and as you can see in Sustainable Nation, it's a story about sustainability, but it's also a story about people. And you get to meet 3 phenomenal Israelis who are all trying to make a difference in the world. And that's really that's the philosophy and the thinking behind a lot of our films.
That's beautiful. Rebecca, thank you for mentioning the beginning of your career, that is being an artist, and then bringing us up to speed to the importance of storytelling. What is the Israeli story to you? You mentioned that you want to tell the stories of Israelis, the individuals, but surely there is also a sum that is greater, or there is a totality that is greater than the sum of its parts. What's the Israeli story that your ars cinematica, if you will, wants to convey? What is Israel to you? And I'm asking this because we are sharing you and your work through an Israel Studies program. So what is the Israel that you're telling the stories of?
That's such a great question. I love that question. I think for me, it's really the thing that pops into my head, first of all, is resilience. Mm-hmm. I think that the bigger Israeli story is one of tremendous resilience, which really comes about in a bunch of the films we've made, but especially in Sustainable Nation, with this idea of, turning adversity to advantage. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that is that so much informs the Israeli story of taking something from nothing and being able to sort of roll with the punches, because it hasn't been easy being here. We're in a contested part of the world, and it's not simple. As we saw Omer saying in this film, when his great grandparents came to the kibbutz, it was a shmama, it was a wasteland, So this idea to be able to, spin gold out of dust and really turn something into something amazing is amazing. Also, the resilience of being able to deal with the challenges psychologically, because like the film about PTSD, that was really a theme there. So I think that's the triumph of the human spirit, to me, is very much of the Israeli story. The ability to how the individual can really overcome and make a contribution. I think that's the other thing. This idea that Israelis seem, I'm sure there's many people in the world that want to make a difference, but Israelis seem to have a penchant for it. They have a drive to not just help themselves, but to really try and help others. So I think that that's also a piece of it. And I think the last thing is also, the generosity of spirit. I think that the heart, and this came out beneath the helmet, where part of the story was really the extent that the commander in this unit went out of his way to help, especially this particular Ethiopian soldier, Makonnen, who was struggling. And he's just these soldiers banded together and just went above and beyond to try and, it wasn't about the army, it wasn't about service, it was about the brotherhood of one to another, of reaching out and really seeing each other as family. I think Israel as a family is a very powerful thing. It's not like anywhere else in the world, In Israel inside, Tal Ben Shachar tells a very funny story. He got more feedback as a parent in his first trip to the playground than in all his years in the United States, right? Because everybody feels like they own, they all feel like if your baby's, they would come up to me and say, your baby can't breathe, when I had one of my kids in a front carrier. But there's something beautiful about that. There's a beautiful safety net And as much as and it's also got the negative side of everybody squabbling with each other. And, because that's what family does, you don't get along, but when push comes to shove, you're really there for each other. And I think that for me is another really big part of what the Azrieli story is.
Being a political scientist myself, I'm tempted, I cannot resist not mentioning the hope that perhaps one of your upcoming projects will look at the Knesset and the Israeli political spectrum to illustrate precisely what you just said. But let's leave politics aside. Rebecca, how do you relate to stories? Do you allow the stories, be it Sustainable Nation, be it the soldiers, be it any part of Israel, to come to you? Or are you proactively reaching out for the stories? Are you researching them? What's your relationship with the stories? Do they come to you and you're having your antennas wide open every day, walking the streets of Israel, the fields of Israel, waiting for the stories to come to you? Or are you looking for them once you know what your next project is going to be?
Well, it's really a great question again. Excellent question. I think it's both. Our early projects were theme-based, and then like Sustainable Nation was like, we wanted to make a film about sustainability, and then we went and found the stories. A project I'm working on now, which is in production, is called Marathon Mother, is about Beatty George, who's a young Orthodox mother of 5 who was trying to qualify for the Olympics, and she's almost made it. So that was a story that story just hit me, and I was like, we got to make a movie about her, So it can go both ways, but I think the majority up until now has been kind of wanting to bring a concept into the world and then finding the characters to fill that, which, I think that the hitting it over the head one is the more compelling type of story usually. It's more challenging, but we've done a good job. Oh, I also was in a film. I was the writer on a film called Hummus.
Oh, yes.
The movie.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was good. And, we've had a lot of success coming up with concept and finding great stories to go with it. So I think it can go either way. And we've tended to be, the first one of concept and then characters.
And my last question before I would turn towards the film itself. What's your measure of success? How do you know? Because your measure of success as the artist, as the film producer is one, and there is another measure of success that is in the eyes of the beholder, the audience. When are you satisfied with the film that you have made, with the story that you have told? And does it always jibe with what the audience tells you?
That's also great. You have to get, first of all, it's like hilarious. We showed Sustainable Nation, just reminds me of dealing with Israelis. We showed it, I don't know, at least a couple of years ago before COVID, we had a screening right when it came out, and we showed it at the Tel Aviv Museum. And, someone came up and gave me such a hard time about the film. The majority of the audience loved it, and they had this like bee in their bonnet. So you can never please everybody. So that's number one. But it's twofold for me. First of all, you're never really satisfied. You always have to kind of shut it down at a certain point. But you work on it, you hone it until you really feel like it's telling a story. For me, the first thing for me most important is when the people I'm portraying in the film, that they're happy with this.
Interesting.
Omer and Ellie and Sivan were pleased with the film. That to me, I felt a responsibility to the characters we're portraying, and that they should be satisfied and feel that the film tells their story accurately. So that to me that is for sure in the priorities of priorities. I want to get their story right, and they should be pleased. That's very, very important to me. And then the second is that it should speak to people, that people should be moved. What is success? When you sit, it's a very interesting and very emotional thing to watch people watch your film, especially for, and I never cease to get, it's just a wild thing. You create something that is able to impact people and make people laugh. First of all, watching people laugh is like, it's a high. When you do something in a film, it makes people crack up. Hummus in particular is a very funny film, and people crack up like 10 times in that. And then you see people crying. And when you see people that are not checking their phones and that they're in your film and they're riveted and, they're moved, that to me is the success. When you brought people into that world and you immerse them in it and they come out. I think the third thing for success for me is when people come out of the film and they're thinking about it and it's still with them the next day. And that the characters they've met are part of their being. See, that to me is the power of a long form documentary, is that you have the chance, as opposed to short things on YouTube. Long form documentary allows people to get to know a character and to become attached to them. And so when these people become part of your psyche and part of your reality, and then you think about them, I mean, I've watched other documentaries that I've seen, great documentaries. I watch a lot. And, you know, when a character stays with me always, then I know, wow, that was an amazing documentary, because this person's now part of who I am and informing my life a little bit.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for opening up your philosophy of art, your philosophy of filmmaking. This is truly very, very special. Now I would like to turn to the film itself. Please walk us through the genesis of Sustainable Nation. Where did the idea, the project come from? How did it germinate? Was there a conversation? Was there an innovation? Was there a crisis? Perhaps one day, did you open your faucet and no water came and you became fascinated by the idea of water shortage?
Thank God, no.
Where did it begin? And how did it get to the final product? How long did it take? So walk us through just the chronology.
Great. Another great question. It really came about because of a supporter who's very involved with Open Door Media, Imaginations Productions. He's extremely passionate, a man named Mitch Julis, and he has founded a couple of sustainability labs in the United States. And he was very passionate about this subject. And he really felt that that where students are at these days, you know, it's sustainability and it's such an issue, right? You know, climate change and all these things are such hot topics that he really felt that it merited. And because of Israel's outsized, you know, really making a lot of outsized innovations in this area, he felt strongly that there's merit there for a film that addresses this idea. So I think that's where it came from. And we as an organization and a filmmaking company are always looking to our target audience are young people between the ages of, you know, 16 and 26. And obviously our films spill out more widely, but, you know, we want to get to that target audience. So I think it was coming from like, wow, this is a great idea. We should look at a film like this. So that's where it started. It was probably about 2.5 years from beginning to end. Our first foray to look into things was I went with the director, Micah Smith, and we went and attended WATEC, which is every 2 years, there is a huge conference down in Tel Aviv of water technology, where they bring in many, many companies and people from all over the world. I meant pre-COVID, obviously, come in, and we just toured around there and started looking for things. And it was overwhelming, the amount of incredible innovation that's going on. So then we were in this, you know, we were in this pursuit of, we need to find good stories and good characters. And it was not easy, interestingly enough. We actually, certain characters came easy. Sivan Ari was, you know, Innovation Africa was kind of a no-brainer, because that was an example, again, of a hybrid. Her story is so amazing and we knew about it. So that was like, okay, she deserves a story. So like she got, you know, she was an automatic. But actually our biggest challenge was finding Brian Pala, the California farmer. Was extremely hard for us to find. The California farmers did not want to appear in our film. They've taken a bad rap with media. They were all very camera shy. We had to go through hoops and hoops to try and find someone who would appear on camera. And even when he did, it wasn't easy. He didn't make himself super forthcoming. He was nice about it, but always nervous. So, and then Omer, we were looking for, Omer Guy, I love him. He to me is the quintessential Israeli. He's so humble. He really blew my mind because he's like a Top Gun fighter pilot. He was a flight instructor and such a humble, unassuming fellow, you know. And then Eli Cohen was just awesome. He came up through one of our associate producers, Oren Rosenfeld, found him, and he was like, this is just, what he's doing is just so crazy and low tech. So it's kind of this contrast of the high tech, what Omer's doing with the low tech of what supposedly low tech of what Ellie's doing. And then it all kind of came together. And then it was a matter of following people. We went to Uganda. I went to Uganda. That was a life altering trip. I had to get 8 immunizations to go to Uganda. That was really.
So you actually went with Sivan to the site.
Yeah, to multiple sites there.
You actually saw directly some of those villages.
Yes, many of them.
You saw those ponds, for lack of a better word.
Oh, we saw this disgusting water hole. The one that we filmed there, where Sam is standing there. Yeah, we were there. I can attest to the life-changing. It's not doctored. Everything we showed there, what she's doing. And it's simple, elegant solutions, what she's doing. And we saw the villages that didn't have the water. And then we saw the villages that have had water for 2 or 3 years. And the difference in the quality of life, when you talk about Maslow's different, levels of actualization, we saw people literally like survival, like the lowest, to really people being able to pursue meaning and be able to run a business and be able to educate the children. And it was this spiral up in quality of life, which is really, really awesome to behold.
In particular, I found that part of that particular story, the Uganda story, so eye-opening. Of course, we read about this, we teach about these processes in the abstract, but to actually see this on the screen, see the actual real-life experiment of women and the importance of women and how women carve out a leadership role in technological, but also social and political change was fantastic. The way it was communicated, I really think, to me, that was one of the highlights of the film. And to hear, you just alluded to Sam, Sivan's partner, telling the story of why the empowerment of women is so important. And he reciting that very heart-wrenching story of one of his family members.
Of his sister-in-law,
So it's not just sustainable nation. To me, it's really not just about technology. It's not just about, but that too, but also about social and political change. And so you explained it so beautifully. So thank you.
That was a beautiful theme that came up for us as we were following Sivan's story. And we very much were intentional about including that women's empowerment because it's such a big part of her story. And really, in the developing world, I think it's a huge part also.
You mentioned earlier at the beginning of our conversation that you want to tell stories about individuals. And then I pushed you about the collective, what about Israel? So here you show us Israel through the stories of 3 very successful innovators, Sivan, Omer, and Eli, and their local partners. What kinds of Israels do they represent to you? How did you connect with, you mentioned already about Omer, the fighter pilot. Eli, a very different Israel.
Yes.
Sivan, awesome. A very different Israel.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you related and you continue to relate to these 3 individuals. And more importantly, please tell us, did they confirm your measure of success? Did they like the stories you told about them?
I think overall, yes, they were very pleased with the film. Sivan was a tough customer, you should know. So she was very conscious because she has a huge organization.
Of course.
And it meshed, she really wanted to make sure it was okay. And I think she was very pleased. They were all pleased with the story. They've all shown it to their, families and very proud of it. And Eli has appeared multiple times to speak for the film. He's been very generous. So they each represent to me, Sivan is an immigrant. She came from France, she lived in Israel, but ended up living in France and then getting educated in the United States. So she to me is the immigrant, idealist who came back and being a woman. I mean, she's just such an interesting, complex person, actually. And I look at her as the mother of everyone. She was everybody's mom, and Eli is also hilarious. He is just a very cool guy. He's the classic. He's very into Buddhist, he's into yoga and he lives, I've been to his place he lives up in Sipori.
Yeah. And
he has this beautiful 100 acres up there, and visiting him up there was so cool. And the stories of how his entire property was taken over by sabra plants. Like it was all cactus.
Wow. Yes.
And he had to reclaim this land, and hearing his stories, and he's just a wild guy. And he was in the high tech, and then got involved in this. So he's just hilarious. He's one of these classic sort of like nonchalant Azrielis that, jets all over the world, never lets it get in his way, and just keeps on. Also very humble. Each one of them, to me, they all share this humility of there was no ego there. They all are very egoless, and I think that's Israelis in their best. Any human in their best iteration is one who doesn't have an ego, who's really in it for the bigger picture. And they all three shared, even though they're all such different personalities, all of them shared that for me, of really being in it for the greater good. It's not for their own aggrandizement. They're all trying to make a difference. They all really care about people. They all three share a tremendous passion. I think that's also a theme amongst them all. So they're all different, but they all have that in common.
Sivan's last sentence as she is leaving the village with the successful completion of the project was this melancholic reckoning when she says, I have wonderful kids or beautiful kids.
Yes.
There is a personal price to pay for making the world a better place. She is very successful, an immigrant to Israel, but also a mother to the project, but a mother at home also.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, Rebecca, that you're also an immigrant. You are also a mother. How did you connect with Sivan? And more importantly, can you open up that closing sentence for us? Why those words? She could have said she could have left us with so many other things, but that's not what she chose to do.
Yeah, that was astute that you caught that, her conflict. Everybody has conflict. By the way, all great films are involved with conflict, though this one didn't have that, this has not so much conflict, but that was an inner conflict that we were trying to bring out. It was challenging with her because she kept her personal life pretty shut up. So we had to work to get that through. I think that every mother always has this, dual situation of of wanting to be the best mom possible, but then having aspirations. So I think this is a female dilemma. Mm-hmm. I myself have it. I don't even profess to be on the level that Sivan is in terms of what she's doing to change the world. And yes, she has paid a lot of traveling. She has small children. She's definitely conflicted about it. And the conflict was there constantly with her. She would bring up also the idea of having another child. She was, she wanted maybe another child, and she wasn't sure that she could handle it, doing everything she's doing. So it's pretty poignant, actually, to have that kind of a conflict, your personal aspirations versus your bigger obligations. Yeah. So I just related to it as like feeling the conflict, and like I felt for her that it's not simple.
And I think the film is so much more powerful and sincere and honest because you chose to do that, because that conflict comes out. In the story of Ellie, we see the conflict with the local bureaucracy. We see the political, administrative conflict. It's different. He's ready to walk away from it all because he's had enough.
Right.
But Sivan's conflict is altogether very different. And I really want to thank you for bringing that out. What was your favorite moment? What is your favorite moment, I should say, in the film? Not favorite character, not favorite...
In the film?
In the film.
I mean, I love... That's my favorite moment in the film?
Yes.
I think, who can't... I mean, I was there when they turn on the water in the village. I mean, that's just like... it was mind-blowing being there and seeing it. It was unbelievable. And the joy, the celebration, their lives were changed. People, it was so emotional. So I think, that's definitely a very moving part for me. I also really, really loved Brian. And just, I loved seeing him in his fields. I loved seeing him as a farmer and his dedication to what he did, and just his, like that scene where he goes around with his dog and just sort of like takes it all in. I always had a soft spot for that. I was there too when we filmed that as well. It's not easy. It's not easy being, dealing with the challenges these farmers deal with. And
it was very interesting to me to see the parallel between Omer and his family, like several generations of kibbutznikim, and then Brian and his. I believe we see his father at the beginning when he's putting up the picture.
Yes.
So it was a very interesting connection between those two characters, connection with the land, connection with the challenges that nature provides, and of course the family lineage. Yeah.
Very interesting. You should know the Jordan Valley and up in Bakersfield, which is the I forget which that's called. I mean, I'm blanking right now. That area of California, which I'm blanking on, and they are so similar. They're similar in climate. They're similar. The Jordan Valley is like a little miniature of where Brian is. Brian's is like on the scale of 1,000, but they're so parallel, and it was really interesting to me to be in both places and see how much they share in common. There's such a commonality there. So
you mentioned, Rebecca, that the highlight, your favorite moment in the film was the final positioning of the water tank in the village. At that moment, as we are anxiously waiting in front of the screen, I believe it's either Sivan or Sam, now I don't remember which one of them, telling us that it actually could not succeed. It happened in the past that a water tank falls.
And it breaks.
It breaks. It's a delicate process.
Right.
Did you have a plan B? What if it had broken? Would you have shown us that?
Of course we would have showed that. You don't want these things to happen, but when they do, again, adversity is great in a film. Showing a setback is great in a film. Of course you'd want to. I think that was the only village she was really putting up. We went to a number of villages in different stages, but yeah, it was always a risk. So yes, we could have not worked. But that was what was the tension. It was real. It was really real.
Rebecca, is there a story that's left out? Was there a fifth that didn't make the final cut? Or a fourth and the fifth that in the next sequel to Sustainable Nation, it's another story that you would like to tell about this topic?
There was another character. He was hilarious. It was something called Home Biogas. And he actually came to Uganda with us. I'm forgetting his first name right now. And that was a really cool story about where they're able to make natural gas from food scraps and all that. And a very, very cool technology. And we were going to put it in and then we nixed it because it really didn't, the film really ended up being about water sustainability. And it just didn't really, it didn't really go in the film. So he got cut. He just didn't make it into the cut. But it was very, very cool. And he was the guy running it was a real, again, a total character, one of these classic Israelis. So that was definitely a puppy. We call it slaughtering puppies in the film business. It's very brutal to say, but you can't put everything in. You have hundreds of hours of footage, and you have to cut things down. So that did not make it into the cut. And there were aspects of the story here and there that didn't make it. And we had a really cool scene of Omer actually in the bomb shelter of his kibbutz. It was really cool. We went into a bomb shelter that hadn't been opened up in about 40 years. And it showed all the little cribs on the walls where the kids used to have to go because that kibbutz was on the front line for years with Jordan. It was constantly getting bombed. And we had a really, really cool scene in there, but it just didn't make it into the film. So like there's good stuff that just doesn't make it.
He's at Kfar Rupin. He's in Kfar Rupin,
yes,
right?
Kfar Rupin, which is really on the border of the Jordan River. And it's quiet now with Jordan, but back in the through the 50s and 60s, probably early 70s, there was constant tension on that border.
Yeah. I feel bad that as an academic, I've been forcing you to talk about the three central characters so far in the movie without giving any exposure to the professor who opens the film and who closes the film. Professor Lipkin.
Clive Lipkin, he's an amazing guy. Oh, that was another story that didn't make it in, by the way. We wanted sorry to interrupt, but
please.
There was a Palestinian, we really wanted to tell the story of Palestinians in the film as well, or Bedouin, just to talk about their involvement in sustainability. And Dr. Lipkin was involved, and we initially went to Uja, which was a village right in the Bika, and we were going to feature that village because he was involved in a whole project there of also reclaiming water and doing all kinds of things. And it just became they didn't want to appear on camera. It became dangerous for them. So that was another story that we would have really liked to be in, but it was very, very difficult. So yes, Dr. Lipkin Clive Lipkin is an amazing man, also totally humble.
How did you find him? What was the story of his involvement, his connection with?
Well, we went to him originally because of wanting to get this Palestinian story.
Project.
He had been a winner of the Genesis Prize, and he was actually doing a project, and he really wanted us to actually document this project. So that's how we were involved with him originally, and it didn't work out, but we really decided we wanted him involved because he had such a broad view, because he's involved with cross-border, water. It's complicated here in Israel, and we did want to touch on that. We didn't want to get political, but we definitely wanted to talk about the bigger picture. So that's where he came in, and that's why we brought him in to kind of bookend the film as he does, and be our voice of authority.
Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. My last question, and then I will read out some of the questions that came from members of the audience who cannot be with us, and then I will turn to the audience to raise their questions directly. But my last question to you is very personal, but still, of course, talking about the movie. After finishing a project, you're no longer the same person you were when you had started it out. I'm sure it had to be the case with each and every one of the films. When you made the film about the soldiers, when you made the film about trauma, when you made the first one about psychology. How is Rebecca Shore after Sustainable Nation comparing with Rebecca Shore before Sustainable Nation? Are you thinking about water differently? Are you thinking about Israel differently? Are you thinking about Africa differently? How have you changed? How has your story changed the storyteller?
Beautiful question. I'm definitely much more, I was always water conscious, but I'm even more water conscious. But I think on a personal level, when you make films, my life has been so enriched by the characters that we followed. You become friends with these people. You get a knowledge of them. So first of all, just as a person, I've been broadened by getting the privilege of getting to know and spend time with amazing people. So they open my eyes, just being exposed. You learn from being with great people, what you want to be like, what you want to emulate. You learn lessons from them. So I've grown in wisdom, for sure. I've grown in humility, I think, going to Africa and seeing and appreciation. It was also really an appreciation of Israel, of living in a developed Western country. Because going to Uganda and drive and also through Ethiopia and Uganda was mind blowing. I have never in my life seen poverty like this. Literally seeing children who were wearing clothes that had holes, like they were rags. They weren't clothes. They were being held on by straps. The most exciting thing they could get was a water bottle, because a plastic water bottle, the kind you throw out, like that was a coveted item. They literally didn't have enough food to eat. There was homes that did not even have, they didn't even have there was no furniture, not empty hut with like nothing there, not a blanket, not a chair, not a table, forget that, just nothing. So it was just this mind-blowing poverty, and yet these people were very happy. So like it was just a really interesting lesson for me, and just getting out of my headspace into theirs, but also really understanding how much need there is, and then coming back to Israel afterwards was just like, wow, it was just such an appreciation of it. So I think it's all of these films, being with the soldiers, each one of them I've had a relationship with people, and it's just made me, I think, much more empathetic person. You learn how to understand what people's challenges are, and then and be a bigger person from that. So I always feel so blessed. It's really an amazing. I always say I would make films. I don't have to get paid. I would do it just because I love it so much. It's such a privilege, really, to be able to be around people, tell their stories, and then be able to impact other people in the world through watching them. It's just doesn't get too much better than that, you know.
That's true. And your dedication and your love of what you do really comes across in the conversation, but certainly it comes across in the film. Rebecca, so let me just turn to a few questions that came in from the audience. I think one of them you have already answered. It was a question about whether you visited personally the sites that we saw in the film. You mentioned Uganda, you mentioned Tsipori, you mentioned Kvarupin. What about India? Did you have a chance to be there with them, or was any member of your crew, of your team, physically there making the shot, I believe, near Bangalore? How did those experience? Did you talk about the India experience afterwards? What was your sense of the India story?
The India story is amazing. I did not go to India. It was, for me, difficult to go personally at the time. It was going to be at a time of year that I have a family. It didn't work out. But of course, Micah Smith, the director, and our cameraman, and we had Oren Rosenfeld, who was a field field producer. They went with Ellie. So I did not have the privilege of going. It was not just Bangalore. They were all over the place. It was also a very grueling trip. It was very, very hot, and there was a lot of flying and traveling there. They did a lot in a short amount of time. But obviously seeing the footage was like, I saw all the footage, and it was, again, just mind-blowing, the poverty, mind-blowing the level of pollution, the ecologic disaster that is India, really, with what's going on. They are in such difficult situation. By the way, I did reach out to Ellie. He's a good friend. I reached out to find out what every time I'm going to speak, people usually want to know what's going on with India, because it was left with such frustration, right?
Yes.
He says that COVID has been very tough. India was hit by COVID hard. He said, but there seems to be an awakening. He said he's getting bombarded by all different organizations, different government, and different that are all extremely interested in getting involved in bringing his technologies to India. So that was very exciting to hear. He's been asked to do a project here in Israel with the Alexander Stream, which is a stream up north, which runs from the northern West Bank through to Israel. And in the West Bank, there's a lot of issues with pollution. The Palestinians are not able to cope, or don't choose to, whatever, I don't know why, but they're putting a lot of polluted water into the water systems here. So he's been asked to do a project on the Alexander River to be able to purify the water that's coming from the West Bank through to Israel, which is also extremely exciting. So they're going to be rehabilitating the stream.
Thank you. The next question from a viewer: what, in your view, makes Israelis so capable and successful at thinking and coming up with what you called in the film out-of-box solutions?
Well, in the film Israel Inside, we talked about these actualizers, and so we had I think 5 or 6. I'm not recalling all of them. One of them was chutzpah. And I think Israelis don't take no for an answer. They have a lot of chutzpah. Like they really, nothing daunts them, and they just go in and do it. So I think chutzpah is one thing, and I think also the idea of learning to fail and failing to learn, like that resilience, this ability to get up again when you fail and to learn from your mistakes and get up and do again. I think that's a very big contribution. And then the adversity would advantage. Israelis have grown up having to deal in a tough neighborhood, in a tough climate, in a tough situation, and you get tough. You figure out how to jujitsu. You figure out how to use that to your advantage and turn it around and make it into something greater. So I think those are 3 big factors with Israelis that help. I do think also this also came out in Israel Inside. A lot of the entrepreneurs are coming out of high-tech situations or in the army. The army tends to be an incubator a lot of times for, Omer was a fighter pilot. Ellie also was a commander in the army. There's a certain amount of learning to take responsibility I think Israelis have an outside desire, not all of them, but a lot of them, of taking responsibility and then wanting to make a difference. So they learn how to take responsibility, I think, young. A lot of the time is through the military and not necessarily only. And then they go ahead and they turn it around and say, okay, so how can I take responsibility for Israel and then for the bigger world?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And final question that was submitted is asking you about your next project. After Sustainable Nation, what?
So we are finishing up. We are done. Actually, the film is been completed. As a film on converts.
Wow.
It's actually it's a kind of a different.
Which way? Converts into Judaism or people?
Yes, converts into Judaism. No, converts into Judaism. We actually followed the three different converts who are all converting.
Amazing.
One's converting Reform, one's converting Conservative, one's converting Orthodox, and there's a very interesting. Each one is, again, it's all about the stories of the people. Israel comes into play because one of them is here. And so that film, God willing, is going to be coming out. I hope, with COVID and everything, we're just balancing when we want to, release it. I think hopefully in the fall or in the winter, we'll hopefully start making the rounds with the film festivals. And then the other film that I'm in production on is a film called Marathon Mother, where we're following the story of Bidi Deutsch, who was a young Orthodox mother of 5, who is basically she basically did qualify for Tokyo, but then had to re-qualify and didn't make it the second time. And so she's really this incredible, not typical Olympic athlete, really breaks a lot of the stereotypes of what you think about a religious woman. And her story is crazy because she only started really running competitively about 5 years ago in her 20s. And she's gone from nothing to Olympic qualifying person. So that's the 2 projects that I'm currently working on.
Wow, from strength to strength. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. You've been so generous with your time, and I know it is getting late in Israel, but let me turn the screen, for lack of a better word, to the audience and see if anybody would like to ask and put a question to you directly. Maybe we can still have a few minutes. People can just come in or raise their hands if there are any questions. Let me just give our viewers another minute. And if nobody is coming forth, if I get any questions by email, I'm going to forward them to you. So maybe we can continue the conversation that way. And I do want to say that once COVID is behind us, I'm planning to bring every year in the summer, I bring a group of our students to Israel. We spend the month in Jerusalem, and I will certainly reach out. You're such a wonderful, animated, passionate speaker, in addition to being a very, very successful and very important film producer, that I think it would be wonderful if our students could benefit from an actual live meeting.
Pleasure. Absolutely a pleasure. We'd love to meet them. And I live in the old city of Jerusalem, so it's good central location. Everybody has to come here. So it would be absolute pleasure. Please be in touch.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the film. And now it's my turn to wish you and your families a wonderful, sweet New Year, and of course, a Gmar Chatima Tova and an easy fast in the coming day of Yom Kippur.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova.
Thank you so much.
And an easy fast.
Gmar Chatima Tova. We should all have a good year, and everybody should be healthy, and we should weather the COVID storm, and God willing, everybody should be able to travel again freely and just have a COVID-free life, God willing.
What more can we wish for? Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bye-bye.
Be well. Bye-bye.